Today we have Kevin Young, our senior SEO strategist, with us to talk about our seven-step framework for AIO visibility for your content. So, in an effort to get this going and get it over with quicker, Kevin, why don't you take it away and we'll go from there.
Absolutely. So, as Mike said, my name is Kevin Young. I'm a senior SEO strategist here at Overdrive. And today we'll be talking about winning visibility in AI search. And I'll be taking you through our AI optimized content workshop. So, let's get into it. So, first, a quick overview of our workshop objectives for today. Really, what we're aiming to do is understand the steps of AI optimized content creation and how it helps our site's content get cited by AI. So we're looking to understand the why behind AIO and learn how AI tools are changing content visibility and how AIO brings together technical SEO and content strategy. We're also going to discuss connecting AIO to your daily work. So we're going to see how small changes to the content development process can actually drastically improve your content's ability to answer questions that users are asking these AI models. And then lastly, we're going to refine how to write for humans and AI. And we're going to learn how to structure content so it's clear, conversational, and quotable to increase the chances of being cited by LLMs. So let's do a quick level set here because there are a lot of acronyms being thrown around these days, a lot of which being used sort of interchangeably. So there really isn't a industry consensus quite yet on, whether it's GEO or AEO or AIO. But what I want to do is sort of share our disposition here at Overdrive and just sort of how we see things. So how we see it is that AIO or AI optimization is sort of this umbrella strategy that incorporates other strategies, but ultimately, AI optimization is all about making your brand visible wherever AI delivers answers. So, again, anything that is about making your brand be visible where AI delivers answers, that is going to be part of AI optimization. So within that umbrella strategy is, of course, SEO, search engine optimization, which I think we all know and love. SEO found or forms the foundation of AI optimization. Without a strong technical foundation on your site, you're not going to be getting cited in these AI-based experiences. So, of course, search engine optimization sort of is the first and foremost strategy within AI optimization. But then there's also GEO or generative engine optimization, as well as AEO or answer engine optimization. Now, these are two terms that you may have heard thrown around recently, and they're often used somewhat interchangeably. But there is a slight difference between the two. So, generative engine optimization is all about structuring information to be machine readable and contextual to ensure that AI tools accurately cite or mention your brand in generated responses. Whereas answer engine optimization is about positioning your brand as the authoritative answer to be cited in AI powered answers for question based prompts. So, really, the distinction there is that answer engine optimization is about being cited as an answer to a question based prompt, whereas generative engine optimization is a little more general and it's more about being cited or mentioned in a generated response that's not necessarily in response to a question based prompt. But ultimately, taken together, these three strategies sort of form the foundation of AI optimization, which is again all about making your brand more visible, more cited, and more trusted in these AI-based search experiences. So let's talk about the paradigm shift that's happening right now in our industry and how search behavior is changing rapidly and how AI is transforming the marketing funnel. So, in the old discovery phase, users used to search broadly for something, say SEO agency. Then they would scroll, they would choose a blue link, they would click on it, maybe they would compare. But now AI systems are surfacing answers directly within their interface, often without a click. That means for us to be found within these AI-based search experiences by the end user, we must first be found by the LLM itself. Next, in the consideration phase, users used to compare across multiple tabs, they'd read reviews, they'd read blogs, but now AI aggregates all of that in one experience, aggregating sentiment, reviews, credibility, again, in one conversational response. And that means for us to be trusted by the users in these AI experiences, we need to first be trusted by the LLM. Lastly, in the action phase, users used to visit a site, they'd read content pages, then they would take an action. Now decisions are happening entirely off your domain and within these AI-based ecosystems. And that means for us to even be an option to be chosen by the end user in the AI-based experiences, we must first be found by the LLMs. So what this means is that we're always going to write for humans first and foremost, but we also need to consider how the LLMs are able to understand and interpret our content, and we need to be more focused on how we are being perceived or how we're coming across to these LLMs because they are the ones restricting us from accessing these end users. So, ultimately, the lesson here is that very soon, people will no longer search and click, they'll ask and decide. And that's a big difference in as compared to how things have worked up until now. And that means we need to adjust and we need to be prepared to make changes. But that sort of begs the question, when will AI chatbots surpass traditional search? And according to this study by SEMrush, AI-based search traffic is expected to surpass that of traditional search by 2028 as organic CTRs continue to decline and more users turn to AI-based search experiences. So ultimately, that means we have 2 years until the current state of things are basically inverse, and there are more users using AI-based experiences than there are users using traditional search. And obviously, that is going to take a big shift in strategy in order to keep up with that level of change. So, if we need to switch from SEO to AIO, what are the strategies we can take to do so? Well, we need to understand sort of some of the differences between traditional search and AI-based search. So there's a large overlap in terms of the strategy, but there's also some nuanced differences that we really need to understand. So let's discuss some various sort of ranking factor type things and compare across traditional search to AI-based search. So for traditional search, the primary KPI that we're going after is ultimately going to always be keyword rankings. Now, keyword rankings will inevitably lead to higher CTRs and traffic volume, but ultimately the KPI that we're tracking against the most is going to be keyword rankings. Whereas in AI optimization, it's a much different story. It's more about AI citations, mentions, and sentiment for those mentions in regard to the prompts that you're tracking. So it's a much different ball game. And ultimately, we're now sort of looking at three different KPIs instead of just keyword rankings on pages 1 and 2 and 3. Now we're looking at whether we're being cited, whether we're being mentioned, and then if we're being mentioned, is the sentiment of that mention positive, negative, or mixed? And ultimately understanding where we're at with those three key KPIs for all of the prompts that you're tracking against. In terms of user input, in traditional search, there's keywords. That's what people put into the search bar. They could be short tail keywords, they could be extremely long tail keywords, but ultimately you're putting keywords into a search bar and hitting search. That's much different in these chat based, or pardon me, these chatbot experiences. Ultimately, in these experiences, it's going to be much more about conversational back and forth prompts, extremely long tail prompts, some sentences or even paragraphs long, filled with additional context. And it's going to use all of that context to to deliver you a response that is very unique. And sort of speaking about that uniqueness, let's talk about the personalization of these experiences. So personalization in traditional search has always been somewhat low. Ultimately, they're looking at things like location or your search history or your cookies. But when I Google something and when you Google something, ultimately that search engine result page is going to look pretty similar. Whereas in chat-based experiences like ChatGPT, if I ask a prompt and you ask a prompt, it's going to use everything it knows about our user profiles. It's going to use all the context of that conversation, context of older conversations, and ultimately the responses that you and I get are going to look much, much different as compared to, say, just Googling the same question on Google. Now, trust signals are another factor that are much different. While traditional search and SEO looks at, a myriad of different factors, ultimately the number one factor in how trustworthy or authoritative your domain is in the eyes of Google, it's all about your backlink profile. How many authoritative websites are linking to your site and therefore endorsing it? And what does that impact on your domain rating? And these were the factors that had the heaviest weight in how trusted your brand was in these search based experiences. In AI based search based experiences, things are much different. The LLMs are looking at across the entire internet to understand your brand's authority. They're looking at how well the content on your site demonstrates the principles of EEAT, or expertise, experience, authority, and trust. They're looking at whether or not you're using subject matter experts to provide unique content or quotes on your site where it can understand, okay, this is an expert speaking to these things. It's looking at third party sentiment. So not just what your domain says about your brand, but what every other website says, what all of the news sites say, what the review sites say, what user generated forums like Reddit are saying about your brand. And it's sort of interpreting all of that to understand how trustworthy your brand is. And then lastly, the goal of these two strategies are ultimately going to be different. In traditional search, it was all about increasing CTRs and ultimately impacting traffic volume. And of course, we're still going after traffic in AIO or AEO or GEO, whichever term you prefer to use. But ultimately, what we can really have an impact on is AI citations, the share of voice for those citations, and brand mentions and brand sentiment in those responses. Because as we know, as CTRs decline, as people clicking through to your website and visiting your actual website decline because they're making purchasing decisions or making all of their decisions within the AI-based experiences, if they're not going to visit our site, then what our main goal is influencing how we're perceived and how we're seen in those AI experiences. So we've discussed the difference between SEO and AIO. We've discussed how the industry is changing and how we can keep up with these changes. Now let's talk and get a little bit more practical, a little more hands-on, and talk about how we can create content that is optimized for AI-based search experiences. So ultimately, what we found is that the best type of content to provide answers for these LLMs that are trying to answer questions is to provide question and answer style content. This can take place in the form of FAQs or FAQ pages, but ultimately that's sort of the style of content we're going to be focusing on today is FAQ or Q&A style content, and how we can craft content that is meant to go out and earn citations within prompts. So this is the 7 steps to AI optimized content creation. Start with step one. Step one is going to be very familiar with anyone who's familiar with SEO, and that's going to be identify target queries and prompts. So essentially, we need to start with keyword research. We need to consider our audience and what questions they're asking. So, what keywords are they searching for on Google? And then extrapolating into what prompts might they be posing in ChatGPT. Now, once we've done our keyword research and we sort of have found the keywords that are going to be relevant to the page we're going to be writing for, then we can extrapolate that keyword research into prompt research. So there are a lot of prompt tracking tools out there right now. We at Overdrive have tested basically all of them. And something I just want to mention is that a lot of these tools are making somewhat big claims about being able to find the right prompts for your site, either just by giving it a URL or maybe a small list of keywords, and they sort of spin those up into a list of prompts. And what I'll say is be cautious with those tools. I think ultimately they could form a good foundation for sort of a starting list for your prompt research, but ultimately they aren't the outputs aren't that amazing. And instead, what we have been focusing on here at Overdrive is leveraging the people also ask SERP features on Google to inspire our prompt research. And the reason for that is that ChatGPT and all of these AI tools, they don't have a search console function. They don't have a place where we can go and see what the most search for prompts are. But what we do have is the people also ask feature on Google. And what this does is it shows when you type in a keyword, it shows popular questions that are actually being asked on Google regarding that keyword. So what we can do is use this and take our keyword research. So for example, in this example here, I've taken the keyword AEO, I've searched it on Google, and boom, I've got 4 inspirations for prompts regarding AEO that I can then consider in my prompt research. So ultimately, this is a great way to find a concrete list of questions that people are asking online, and we can then use those as our prompt research. So now that we understand the keywords we're going after and the prompts and the questions we're trying to answer, now we need to form our topic or content around a main question. So we want to pose a main question and follow-up questions. So we need to frame our content around a primary question that the page intends to answer. So your page should have a purpose, and that purpose should be answering a question that you know your users are going to be asking. So that main question should be posed in a header tag near the top of the page, maybe in an H1, maybe an H2, or if you're going to do an FAQ section at the bottom of a page, it can also just be the first question in that FAQ section. But ultimately, this helps AI models clearly map your page to a user intent, understand the context, and cite relevant passages. Next, after we've posed that main question that the page is really aiming to answer, we also want to follow up that question with related sub-questions. So once we have that, main question in the top of the page in that, first couple of headers, we can then have them either spaced out in the rest of the headers of the page, or we can have them in the FAQ section at the bottom of the page. But ultimately, these follow-up questions should follow a logical progression and go deeper on a single topic, as we want to go deep on a topic rather than broad across many topics. That's content depth versus content breadth. We're always going to go for content depth in AI optimization. But ultimately, these questions should follow that logical progression of what might, if a person asks this question, they get their answer, what's that next question going to be? And the question after that, and sort of following that logical waterfall there. So here in this example at the bottom, we have a page from the Overdrive site where ultimately the page is about understanding SEO copywriting. So understanding SEO copywriting, the real question there, the question we're trying to answer is, what is SEO copywriting? So that is the first H2 at the very top of the page. We're posing that question, and then directly underneath it, we're answering that question. But then we're not just stopping at what is SEO copywriting. We also have this FAQ section at the bottom of the page where we're answering, or pardon me, we're asking and answering logical follow-up questions like what is SEO for copywriting? What is copyright in SEO? What are the three pillars of SEO copywriting? So we're able to then sort of keep pulling that thread and follow that question into its logical follow-up questions. Now that we've posed the questions, in step three, we need to give a clear, direct answer up front. And what I mean by upfront is we do not want to bury the lead. That is one of the biggest mistakes you can make in AI optimization is burying the answer in paragraphs worth of text. What we want to do is provide a concise answer directly under the question. We want to provide a quotable answer, ideally within the first 2 to 3 sentences directly under the question. And we want to think of this first paragraph as essentially a summary that could almost be pulled completely from the page and answered in the AI-based chat, and basically given to the user as an answer. Of course, they're going to rewrite it and do their own thing to it, but ultimately, that's what we're really looking for. We're looking for a quick summarized answer that could be pulled directly from the page and used as an answer. Once we've done this, once we've sort of provided this summarized answer up top, what we need to do is then expand on this answer with supporting details, data, and context. So we want to back up this answer with the supporting content to increase our chances that our passages used are cited by LLMs, because LLMs will have additional context and information to pull from. And then once that main question has been answered, we want to do the same for any sub questions or FAQs. And I think a great example of exactly what I'm speaking towards here is this example here on the right. So we're asking, should my brand join Threads? And right away, we're saying there is no real downside to jumping on Threads. And so we say yes. So we're answering it right there in the first 2 sentences. And then we're also having this nice summarized answer that sort of sums up all of our thoughts answering this question. But then we have 2 more additional paragraphs that just provide additional context around Threads, additional context to, sort of our thinking around the topic. And this provides, again, that summarized answer that can be pulled directly from up here. And then also that follow-up context that's going to be very valuable for users that click through and read the page, or just for the LLMs to pull additional context from. So step 4 is all about structuring the page. And what we want to do here is we want to structure for scannability. And what I mean by scannability is the ability of both humans and LLMs to quickly consume the content, to look through it and to find what they're looking for, to find the answer that they're looking for. And there are several strategies we can use to increase the scannability of the page, including using headers, FAQs, lists, and tables. So first, let's talk about headers. We want to break our content into labeled sections with H2 and H3 tags that follow a proper hierarchy and logical flow, as we've mentioned. What we want to do is create short and digestible paragraphs that succinctly answer a given question. And we want to break up this content with header tags so that it, again, helps users and LLMs quickly consume and cite our content. Now, ultimately, this practice is sort of colloquially known as content chunking. And actually, there's been a bit of an industry shakeup recently regarding content chunking. Danny Sullivan, the former Google search liaison, actually recently came out and sort of came out against the practice of content chunking. Ultimately, he believes that it's leading site owners to generate content that's more focused on LLMs than it is for humans. And he thinks that that's something that Google will eventually have to make changes to not encourage. My thoughts and a lot of people in the industry are thinking that we're not necessarily sure that we agree with him there. Ultimately, this is a strategy that is currently working and working very well. And ultimately, he feels that it's leading people to write for LLMs and not humans. Whereas our disposition is that breaking content into very easy to read, very digestible chunks is writing for humans. And unless you're going way too far and just writing, one or two sentence chunks for an entire page that's meant entirely for the LLMs, I think that's not necessarily what Danny Sullivan's getting at there. So just wanted to provide that context for anyone who happened to see that news. It's certainly an interesting development, something we're going to keep our eye on. But I think ultimately the industry has sort of decided that content chunking is here to stay. So I think ultimately that is a strategy that will continue to work well. Um, Another strategy that works really great, as we've mentioned, is leveraging FAQ sections that provide this great opportunity to answer any follow-up questions with their own succinct answer. But then other on-page features like lists and tables are a great way to make information easier for the LLMs to extract and cite. So tables and lists are far more efficient at communicating a large amount of information than it is to type all of that out in paragraph text. I think a great example of that here is this list from one of our articles on Overdrive site. We have a very long list of some pretty involved things here, and you can sort of just imagine how messy this would be written out in paragraph form. Listing things out in this bulleted list is much easier for both humans, us, to scan through this list with our eyes, but then also it is much easier for the LLMs to consume and interpret. And then, of course, here we have a screenshot of one of our FAQ sections. And the point I just want to make here is that FAQ sections don't need to overwhelm a page. We've implemented a system on our site where until you click into each of these questions, they're actually collapsed. So it's just a small list of questions at the bottom of your page. And just the idea that, you can provide this more additional information to users who are searching for it, as well as the LLMs, without it being overwhelming blocks of text, filling up a page. So step 5 is all about writing the piece. And while we're writing the piece, we want to write conversationally and authoritatively. So we want to use a conversational tone to match how people actually ask questions, and then we want to answer them authoritatively. So, and then, if possible, in this content, we'd love to leverage subject matter experts for exclusive quotes and bylines, as that is something that LLMs are particularly interested in. So these AI models rely on conversational phrasing to match queries semantically. So what we want to do is avoid excessive jargon, and we want to match the type of language and tone that our users are going to be using when asking ChatGPT and other similar chatbots questions about our brand. And then regarding subject matter experts, content written by known SMEs is far more authoritative and valuable than anonymously written content. And the reason for that is if the LLMs are able to understand that this is a person who is an expert in a given industry, and here are references to their biography across the internet, and then here's their name either in a byline on a page on your site or in a quote on an exclusive quote on your site. When it's able to connect that entity of that human being, that expert, across different pages or different websites on the internet, and see that this written content is written by them, they're then able to trust that content a lot more because they know the person, they know their expertise, they know their credentials, and that is far more valuable to these LLMs than content that is simply written anonymously. And then in terms of the sort of style and tone we want to write for. We want to write for a conversation and not a monologue. Again, we've discussed this. When we prompt ChatGPT, we rarely stop at just the first question. We're going to ask a question, get an answer, and then ask a follow-up question, get an answer, and ask the next question after that. And our content must reflect this sort of logical back and forth. And we need to essentially anticipate what someone would ask next so that we can pose and answer that for them in our content. And then here at the bottom of this page, we just have a great example of how you can infuse subject matter experts into your content. So we're asking, what is the November 2024 core update? We have a short paragraph explaining the answer. And then we also have a nice paragraph that's a quote from our director of SEO. So we're infusing a direct quote from a known expert in the field to just get back that initial statement up with additional support and context.
Kevin,
Now, yes,
Kevin,
please.
before we move on back on step five, we had a question that came in that was sort of relevant to this step. And the
Please.
question was, are robust about us pages and detailed author bios the best ways to demonstrate subject matter experts are behind the content?
That's exactly right. So leveraging author pages for the writers on your site where you're going through their bio, you're explaining their credentials, if where they went to school, if they have relevant degrees in your field. These are all things you would want to explicitly mention on an author page. And then what it's really about is having that author page connected to the byline on your page. So if you can actually say, written by Kevin Young, and then you click through to Kevin Young and you land on the Kevin Young author page, that is just a great way to connect the actual piece of content to the person that's writing it. And then it can also, you can even link to, LinkedIn pages or social media accounts and to that author page. And then, the LLMs are sort of able to see that spider web and understand that, okay, this person over here on this domain is the same person that wrote this page on this website. And that's a really great way to demonstrate that you have these subject matter experts creating your content for you. So if that answers that question, let's move on to step 6. So step 6 is the last step before publication, and that is to write meta tags and include schema markup. Now, this may sound very familiar because these are two, vital steps in the SEO process, but it's also very important for AI in its own right. So we need to, of course, create a title tag and meta description that uses the primary keyword and follows SEO best practices. But ultimately, in the case of these AI-based experiences and how LLMs use these tags, title tags offer a short, reliable description of the page topic, while meta descriptions offer a quick explanation of the intent and scope of the page. But taken together, these tags aid in the LLM's retrieval because it allows them to decide whether a page is relevant to a query before having to even actually visit it. So these tags are absolutely used by the LLMs, and they are extremely important in aiding retrieval of your content. And then another thing that's if not equally important, even more important in AI optimization than it is for SEO is schema markup. We absolutely have to add applicable schema types to these pages before publication. It's really no longer something that's optional. Schema markup is vital to understand for these LLMs to understand what your content is and what features are actually present on that page. And we've seen that leveraging schema types like article or FAQ page schema actually substantially improve a page's chance of being cited by these LLMs. So schema is more important now than ever. Having accurate, up-to-date and error-free schema is extremely important. And you really need to focus on these types of schema like article, product review, FAQ, local business, video, recipe for food sites, event. These are all schema types that are very powerful in aiding LLMs in sort of retrieval and choosing your page over other pages that it might pull from. Now, the last step in the 7-step process to AIO content creation actually happens after the piece is published. And that is periodically refreshing and updating your site content. Essentially, what we need to do is review key pages regularly to update content, data, and timestamps. Now, the reason we do this is that AI systems value fresh, current information, and pages with outdated information lose visibility quickly. And in fact, it can actually hurt your brand's trustworthiness or authority if you have are found to consistently have outdated, incorrect, or no longer relevant information. So, what we need to do is periodically update our content so that it signals authority and ongoing relevance. It signals that, hey, we're still maintaining this page and ensuring that everything on it is correct and high quality. And that is communicated to both search engines as well as these AI models. So while there's not really a rule of thumb regarding how often you should update your content. It's really more based on finding your own cadence that makes sense for your content and your site while keeping information correct. So, information that's liable to become incorrect over time is content that should be updated more frequently. But ultimately, it's about finding your own cadence. So, for this example, I pulled a couple sort of evergreen style pieces of content from our site that were written, over a year ago or just under a year ago. And ultimately, these are two pieces of content that if we want them to still be cited in these LLMs and still be relevant in the minds of these AI models, we need to update these pages. We need to go in, we need to make sure that everything is up to date, that is everything is still correct. We need to add some additional context, add some additional sections, maybe add some more FAQs at the bottom of the page. But we need to go in, improve the page, and then update that published on date to either a new published on date or an updated on date. Maybe I add in my name as reviewed by, edited by, but ultimately it's all about making periodic and incremental improvements and updates to your pages to ensure that they always stay top of mind for these LLMs in their retrieval systems. So that was the 7 steps to AI content creation. As a quick overview, step 1 is identify target queries and prompts. Then we're going to extrapolate those prompts into the questions we're going to be answering. We're going to pose the main question and follow-up questions. We're going to give clear and direct answers up front for each of those questions. We're going to structure the page for scannability by leveraging headers to break up content, FAQs, lists, and tables to more easily convey information to the LLMs. We're going to then write conversationally and authoritatively. And then we're going to write meta tags and include the relevant schema markup before publication. And then after publication, we're going to periodically refresh and update our content to ensure that it stays up to date and top of mind for these LLMs. And that is pretty much it. I really appreciate everyone's time. And, I believe we have a couple minutes here for questions if anyone has any questions.
Yeah, thanks, Kevin. Great presentation and some great information there. We had just two that I can see coming in, and just wanted to get those to you. So the first one, which of the 7 steps tends to be the most overlooked by content teams today, and sort of what impact does that have on AI visibility for them?
Yeah, absolutely. So the steps that's overlooked the most, I think, an easy one that's easy to forget is schema markup. A lot of domains don't leverage schema as thoroughly as it could be. And since it's sort of oftentimes this last step before publication, it can often sort of get, lost in the sort of, forward movement, and it can not get uploaded to the page before it's published. So I think certainly leveraging schema is absolutely a vital step that can't be forgotten. But I also think that this idea of posing questions is something that is that's easy to get lost in translation, and the idea that we're not answering disparate questions that are sort of on the same topic, but instead we're answering questions that follow this logical flow, because we're really trying to sort of reverse engineer the conversation that's happening on the opposite side, that's happening between the user and the LLM. So it's really about sort of reverse engineering the questions they're asking and giving the answers in a way that will be selected by the LLMs.
Okay, thank you. And conversely, sort of, I guess, if someone could only fix like one step of their content process after this session, like what's the one step you'd prioritize for them to really focus on, and why?
Yeah, I think it's more or less this one. I think it's the idea that to create content that is targeted towards being cited by LLMs, we need to really be actually posing these questions as much as possible. It's often, it sometimes can maybe feel awkward to actually have a question mark, in a header tag, or maybe an FAQ section isn't something you've done before. But ultimately, having these questions reflected directly on your site, semantically matching what type of question a user would type in to ChatGPT, that is huge. And then this step three of answering that question directly underneath it, not burying the lead, giving a nice, concise, summarized answer that's then backed up by supporting content, but having that summarized answer, I think that's the most powerful step in sort of how you can formulate content to get cited in these LLMs. And I think that that's sort of the step that is hardest for teams to sort of wrap their heads around and to sort of repeat in all of their content.
Okay, great. Well, that's it. I think we're right about at time
Excellent.
here. So thanks, Kevin, for the presentation, and thanks everyone for joining. If you have any other questions for us regarding AIO that we can answer, please send those along. We will follow up with you with the recording of this presentation for the future. And if you have any other questions or anything like, please feel free to contact us, and we'll get going on that right away. Okay, thank you very much. Have a good day, everybody.
Thanks so much for your time, everyone.